Welcome back to the Christian Capitalist Podcast, everybody, where the more we make, the more we give. I'm so glad to be joined today by Addison Williams from Faith Driven Entrepreneurs and Faith Driven Investors. Good morning, Addison.
Good morning, Rich. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Thank you, and likewise, we're so glad to see you this morning and talk about our movement. As part of our introduction, we like to tell folks, please follow us on social media. Enjoy the conversation that we have today. There's going to be plenty of discussion about faith and business and how we love our neighbors through making money and then giving it away to the poor and needy in the name of Jesus. So there's going to be show notes where you can find links. You can follow us on social media, and of course, go to our website to learn more about our movement and, if you like, a way to buy the book. But first, we got to talk with Addison about your ministry and the important work that you're doing with faith and business. So, as a first order of business, where are you joining us from today?
I am in Northwest Arkansas, joining you from right outside of Fayetteville, Arkansas, where the University of Arkansas Razorbacks like to play their sports.
Yes, they do, and have been in the College World Series here in the last week. I haven't been following
Yes.
up on that, but I rode an elevator in Nashville this week with some LSU fans who were happy, and so I took it that it hadn't gone well for the Hogs.
Unfortunately, the Hogs are out. They did lose, but it's okay, right? That's the way that baseball goes.
There's only one team at the end that has won it all, so it is the nature of the beast. Um,
Absolutely.
So you and I were talking baseball earlier, and I have a feeling we could talk baseball all day. I don't want us to get distracted by that, though, because we have a mission to focus on. So what took you to Northwest Arkansas? Are you originally from there?
Actually, I'm from North Texas.
Okay.
I played college baseball in Northeast Oklahoma, which is where I've met my wife. We actually just celebrated our 10-year anniversary last week. And
Congratulations.
so we are, thank you, thank you. We've got two young kiddos, 7 and 5, a daughter and a son. We're actually in the middle of softball, 8U softball right now. We've got our championship game tonight. So we
All
are
right.
locked in on the baseball family. But uh, born and raised in North Texas. And actually, I work fully remote for Faith Driven Entrepreneur. And we RV traveled as a family last year. So we ended up in Northwest Arkansas.
Wow. Isn't that something? Well, and so congratulations on making it to the 8U softball finals. That's outstanding.
Absolutely.
Uh,
Absolutely.
My wife Rebecca and I just celebrated our anniversary last week. We are a few years ahead of you and your wife Keisha. We have 3 kids and just celebrated our 27th anniversary. But boy, Addison, I feel for you. In the third week of June, watching youth sports, that's a special calling.
It is a special calling. And I got suckered into coaching too. So it's all coming to fruition for
Oh,
me.
that's awesome. That's great. Well, man, I'm so glad to hear that you and your family are doing well and growing in your own way in that part of the world, Texas, Arkansas, and went to college in Oklahoma. One of the reasons that our friend Brianna, who's the podcast director, introduced us is that you two met through an organization called Faith Driven Entrepreneurs. Can you tell everybody a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Would love to. I myself am a regional director of community for Faith Driven Entrepreneur. Ultimately, we want to awaken faith driven entrepreneurs to fulfill their God given call to create. And from a movement perspective, Henry Kastner co founded the movement. And in 2016, he co founded Sovereign's Capital in 2012 with the mindset, being a serial entrepreneur himself, he wanted to really have a space for entrepreneurs to come to receive great content that helped them in this underlying foundation of what does it mean to be a faith-driven entrepreneur with the question mark. And then the action mark comes into our content that we create and then move entrepreneurs hopefully into community. I myself am working with entrepreneurs day in and day out and helping them not only find community, but we have global groups around the country. And so my job primarily is to work with our facilitators, those that are leading groups, making sure that they have a successful, positive experience. And then, of course, one of the other great things that we do is partner with churches. We
Mm.
want there to be a vertical for entrepreneurs. We would love for it to be in every church in the US, which there are about 300,000 of them, but we got to start with one and then we continue to grow from there. But entrepreneurs is really my lane. We like to call them heroes.
Mm.
We also focus on investors, teams, and pastors whenever we want to look to inspire and encourage people.
That's fantastic. Boy, Addison, we got a lot to talk about over our time
We have a
together.
lot to talk about, Rich. Absolutely.
That's fantastic. All right, so let's start at the start. What got? Would you tell us the name of the founder again for Faith Driven Entrepreneurs? Henry.
Henry Kashner co-founded Faith Driven Entrepreneur. Justin Foreman is our executive director, and I myself have been with the organization for a little over 3 years now.
Gotcha. So, what called him to do this? It was he an entrepreneur before he started this movement?
He was. Henry will tell you he found his first love buying a t-shirt for $5 and then selling it for 10. And he has quite the entrepreneurial journey, but at the end of the day, the most important thing, the more time you spend with Henry, the closer you get to his true why, and that's to empower others to really fulfill their call to create, which is obviously our tagline, but most importantly, get entrepreneurs in community because we often are lonely and isolated. We
Hmm.
don't know that we need community, but at the same token, we need community. And he wanted to fill that void and also empower entrepreneurs to figure out, the head and the heart balance. How do we tell our mind our intentionality of our heart? Why do we get into business to begin with? And that's why we start our first video for the series, Our Call to Create. Why do we have this? What does it look like to be in co-creation with God?
Gotcha. And as promised, only 7 minutes ago, we're going to include a link to Call to Create in our show notes, so that folks who are listening at this point can hit on that and go see that video. Addison, earlier I was recording an episode of our podcast with John Gallagher, who has a podcast on his own called Uncommon Leaders, and is a business coach with an organization that he started called Growing Champions. And through that business coaching, he described his own business as being a solopreneur, not an entrepreneur. And I thought that was really interesting. I hadn't heard that phrase before, but you're exactly right. Especially for small business owners who are entrepreneurial, it can often feel like you're in an island, like you are a solopreneur, even if you have folks that work for you, because all the issues that challenge entrepreneurs. Have you seen that? And do you agree with that kind of designation of being a solopreneur?
That's a great question, Rich. Whenever people ask me what is an entrepreneur, I think you can go a million different directions.
Yeah.
But what I like to focus in on is an entrepreneur, whether you're a solopreneur or whether you're a serial entrepreneur, for example, of Henry, an entrepreneur defined as somebody that takes action, often taking action with greater risks on the backside of that. And so, what I love to do is just interact, hear people's stories, and say, hey, especially as a solopreneur, you are doing business by yourself and you need people, you need community. Because we often know we're coming from a faith based perspective. The enemy loves idle hands. And if we're not
Mhm.
being proactive in the way that we're seeking out intentional community and being intentional for building relationships outside of our business, it's an amazing thing that can happen. And oftentimes I hear entrepreneurs repeat our tagline day in and day out. I was feeling lonely. I was feeling isolated, whether I'm a solopreneur or I'm an entrepreneur or even an intrapreneur, right? Those that have a full-time job, but they have a passion. They're building a business on the side. They're scratching the itch and they're really moving because they see the elevation. And whenever I'm able to hear stories and then provide just a sounding board for the entrepreneurs and give them just a little bit of guidance or direction based upon the feedback that they tell me, that's what fires me up.
I love that. I can tell. All right, so let's take a step back then and talk about the ways that you engage entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, or intrapreneurs. I love the lingo here, but let's
Oh,
just say
yeah.
let's just say business people. Is it typically in a group setting? I understand that's how you and Brianna met, or is it more one on one, or both?
So I would say it's all the above. So whenever it comes to faith-driven movements, whether we're talking about an entrepreneur or an investor, we have intentionality. We actually follow the Luke chapter 6 model of Jesus had 12 disciples, and then he told them to go and multiply.
Hmm.
And so with that, our movement is built around a small group model. We typically say 8 to 15 entrepreneurs or investors, depending upon the audience that's listening to this call. We want you to find a community. And so with that, we work with our facilitator. He or she completes this group. And one thing that we love to do is have next step calls. And so that's when we offer for all the participants in a foundation cohort. A cohort is what we call it.
Hmm.
We allow them to schedule a one-on-one call with each regional director, depending upon the region of the world that they're in. And then we have a 15-minute call, like our call with Brianna. It was 15 minutes scheduled, and then it went to 45 minutes. But at the end of the
I'm not
day,
at all surprised by that.
exactly. At the end of the day, we want to enable the entrepreneur or investor to come into a call and say, hey, what is your best next step? Does that look like it's continuing in community? Does that look like it's starting your own group virtually or in person? We would love for it to be at a local church. But it's the opportunity to say, hey, what's best for you? How can we as a movement support you directly or point you to resources to help you grow and steward this business or your investments well? We don't solicit funding. We're not a funding organization, but we do point entrepreneurs and investors to know trusted partners that we work with to refer out based upon different needs.
That's fantastic. And I can tell just in the way that you've described that, the needs between entrepreneurs and investors can often be very different. We'll pull on that thread of the baseball in just a little bit.
Yeah,
Meantime, though,
absolutely.
when you talk about resources for the folks who are in these cohorts, what does that look like? As a serial entrepreneur myself, depending on the industry, depending on the type of business, there can be a garden variety of needs that entrepreneurs face: legal, accounting, marketing, technology, like we're dealing with today on this fantastic Riverside software. So, what does that look like from your end? Does faith-driven entrepreneurs, faith-driven investors, as an organization, have folks that it enlists to help out, or is it more region by region?
Great question, Rich. So, when it comes to the framework that we provide as an organization, top level, we do two things and we hone in on that: content and community. From an
Hmm.
entrepreneurial side, we have what we consider the marks of a faith-driven entrepreneur. And so we have 12 marks. Our foundation series takes people through 8 of those 12, starting with our call to create. And then that expands on in a thematic fashion of, you know, what does it mean for God to own my business? What does it mean for excellence to matter? And then we love the actual Nature Sweets tomatoes. Um, it's a great message talking about unleashing the power of people. So we start with our call to create, the why, and then we build upon that into action items of what does it mean to actually unleash the power of people. So that's the kind of the framework that we do on the entrepreneurial side. From an investment side, we talk about stewardship and those stories, so that it's a video based curriculum, if you will.
Hmm.
And those stories talk about stewardship. What does it mean for investments to make an impact? And so, from a standpoint of how we interact with our audience directly, it's more of I like to call it the head and the heart battle, right?
Hmm.
More of the why. We don't provide direct curriculum for opening finances or marketing, things of that nature. We leave our great partners to do that, right? C12 is a great organization that really hones in on the peer advisory aspect of business ownership and walking through that. So, from a standpoint, we're putting people together in terms of community and growth, really wanting to uncover the heart posture in leading a business and investing well.
And investing it. And I love that because, of course, as a pastor, the focus for us is the heart as well. People will figure out the technical issues if you point them in the right direction, but the heart is
Absolutely.
ultimately what matters, and a heart for giving. and hard work. So let me ask you this. You said something just fantastic that kind of implied that we're on the same page about the theology behind this. What does it mean for God to own my business? One of our core concepts, the Christian capitalist, is that we here on earth, for just a very short bit of time, do have private property. We have private ownership, but everything we have comes from God. And once we're gone, everything goes back to God. It's up to us to take care of it while we're here. Sounds like we're on the same page about that.
Absolutely. 100%. Stewardship versus ownership. We often think of we have these ideas, uh, but the Bible says to steward our ideas well. It talks about refining. We all have many parts of the body, but there's one body in Christ.
Hmm.
And as we tap into this idea of defining what Addison's gifts, talents, and abilities are, as we continue to walk along that journey, that's when we discover our why. That's when we discover our purpose. And so infusing that into the practical of what does my business look like, from a mission to a value to a practical. Chick-fil-A is a fantastic example of that as a faith-based company. But the true value that they give is they just want to be a caring organization. And you see that from how they hire to how
Yeah.
they interact with the client, saying my pleasure at the end of every interaction.
Exactly, at the end of every interaction. It's funny you mention Chick-fil-A, because this gets back to something that you said earlier, Addison, and that is, what does it mean to have a commitment to excellence? I think when we talk about being stewards of what God has given us and employing the elements in business, that a commitment to excellence is an important part of that. We wouldn't want to worship God with anything less than our best. How does that play out at FDE?
I think that's a great question. Whenever I think of excellence, I go back to my baseball days, right? I think of cutting corners, right? If you don't cut corners, you do that extra rep or you go that extra inch. Baseball is a game of inches, and I think it correlates very well to what we're talking about in terms of business. Because if you truly buy into this idea of excellence, you're being proactive, but at the same time, and this is what I love talking about or hearing entrepreneurs say whenever I interact with them, it's this idea of taking action, but also being intentional about being still and listening.
Hmm.
And whenever I talk about, we have a video that's called Excellence Matters and why that does matter. But the point that I always like to reiterate whenever I facilitate these groups, I myself facilitate personal online groups
Okay.
in lieu of my job as well. But it's a value add, but then also you have to be careful because sometimes excellence, this pursuit of excellence, can turn into perfectionism, and we know that we can never reach 100%. And so I really feel like honing in on the element of excellence truly does matter. But I think it comes down to two things: don't forge excellence for sake of perfection, but then also, as you're being excellent, it naturally comes into honing in on your passions. What really fuels you day in and day out. And that's going to directly coincide with how you lead your business or how you start your business. And that's a very important concept to remember. Excellence is great, but don't forsake that for sake of perfection either.
Absolutely. And it's so funny, Addison. You almost said something that I say on a regular basis, both in my family and in my business, because I make mistakes pretty frequently, including yesterday in Nashville. We were in one of the places on Broadway. Everybody went up to the third floor to the rooftop area to look out over Nashville. I ended up on the second floor, just got up on the wrong floor of the elevator, got separated, and it was chaos. Anyway, mistakes happen. And I say, in those circumstances, there was only one perfect man, and it was not me. And so, if we keep that in mind, that God's forgiveness and grace through His Son Jesus will ultimately get us through the mistakes that we made, right? Um,
Amen.
what the concept of the Christian capitalist is two pillars: hard work and generous giving to the poor and needy. And one of our tenets is that we work hard and we give because we're made in God's image. The very first thing we know from Scripture is that God created the heavens and the earth and the entire universe, and we know that God gave us not only life, but He gave us His only Son. So as we think about the purpose and the why, tell us some stories about that. When you've had entrepreneurs that you were investors that you've worked with who've had this kind of eureka moment, what was that like, and how did it change them to realize those fundamental principles?
I have so many stories.
We got all the
So
time,
many
man.
stories. We have all the time in the world, but if I could hone in on one, this is actually one that really stands out to me, but it also recently just happened. And so, painting this story, whenever somebody subscribes to our newsletter, we always, as regional directors, we send out just a welcome email saying, "Hey, thanks for subscribing to the newsletter. Entrepreneurship is often a lonely journey, but it doesn't have to be. If you'd like to book a time to connect, please book a time." And so we get a lot of interest from that. And it's very fruitful because we get to just better understand who our audience is and what they're all about. To forge this story, that email went out, and I had an entrepreneur book a call. That 15-minute call, it turned into about 45 minutes. I like to talk, obviously, but nonetheless, it was very intentional. And we had a great conversation with this entrepreneur, and he has an AI startup. He's actually the world's first AI private investigator, which is very
Wow.
cool. He's
Yeah.
actually out of Florida,
Okay.
and he just has an amazing story. Whenever we had this conversation, 2 weeks had gone by, and he sends me an email. I was actually going to my quiet time, and I had some documents on my computer that I was going to open up and just kind of reflect on. And instead, the email from this entrepreneur came to me, and it was the first thing. And the subject line was bolded of, "Hey, you need to check this out." It's kind of one of those God winks, right? So I
Yeah.
read the email from this entrepreneur, and he was talking about how he he is seeking capital, and part of his main focus as his organization is deeply rooted in something that he's passionate about, which is one of our world's greatest problems, anti-human trafficking.
Oh, wow.
And whenever he shared this with me, it was an impactful moment for me because we all have impact even in ways that we don't even realize it. And at the moment, he was having conversations of like, I want to do my business well, but I also have a very important why I want to do this. And at times, whenever we share what we're doing with our business, we often don't talk about the why. We also often leave out the why.
Yeah.
But crafting the timing of our first interaction to the timing of a week later, whenever he said, "Addison, God speaks to people and God speaks through people, and you were that person." Because
Wow.
what I did on that call, unbeknownst to me, I was just asking genuine questions about his business. And hey, I mean, yes, what you're doing is awesome. Like, I love your business, but tell me more about the why. Like,
Right.
what are you
Right.
doing? And he just started pouring this out. And then 2 weeks later, I get a very intentional email saying thank you, because it just allowed him to have a safe space to invoke his why and to reinforce that idea back into his heart. Why am I into business? And what is my purpose? Why am I starting this? And he's doing very well, by the way. But the intentionality I get to see of asking questions and then allowing entrepreneurs a space. And we see that all the time. We don't get to hear all the great stories, but whenever you talk about how do entrepreneurs actually benefit from this opportunity to be in community with one another, especially in a small group setting, the light bulbs tend to go off, or the light bulbs were there, the
Right.
light was on, but you
Right.
just needed a little bit of refinement.
Yep, that's exactly. It's so funny you say that as we're sitting here on the coming into the third weekend of June. Many Christians just celebrated Pentecost when the tongues of flame descend on the heads of the disciples, and they all begin to speak different languages to spread the gospel around the world. I love that notion of light bulbs starting to go off in a small group, because having that sense of community is what allows people in so many situations to have a eureka moment. Hey, that makes sense. Now I know what I'm doing. By the way, one of the books, I used to practice law and was a corporate lawyer in healthcare. And on average, over the years, Addison, I did this for almost 30 years. On average, over the years, we would start a new business once a week. So probably 4 or 5 a month. And I would always ask folks at the outset when they would come to me and say, I want to start a business. Why are you doing it? What's the goal? And it sounds like you're having some of those conversations. Since then, a book that I like to promote to folks is called Start with Why, because it'll help you focus in on the mission before you get going. So in this circumstance, because we that means Addison and Rich, I think have been talking about entrepreneurs in terms of starting for-profit businesses. But have you found entrepreneurs who look at the why and then say, you know what, I really want to have a nonprofit to tackle whatever issue that I've developed and decided to address? What do you think about that?
I think it's great. I actually talked to an entrepreneur out of Lubbock, Texas, a couple of weeks ago that has been working in the for-profit sector, but also volunteering and working in the nonprofit sector. And he and his wife actually found a gap in the nonprofit sector, and now they're going to make that their full-time job
Oh,
to
wow.
fulfill the gap that was made. And so I know that we've talked a lot about entrepreneurship, invest in business world. I would say also that executive directors of nonprofits are just as valuable as people running
Yeah.
businesses in the
Yeah.
marketplace. And so we encourage anybody to come. I know that we have a very clear audience whenever we say entrepreneur and investor, but executive directors of nonprofits, they're also taking risks. They're leading organizations. They still have a marketing budget. They still have a promotions budget, and they're still executing. They might not be selling gadgets, but they're
Right.
often changing lives in some sort of way. And so, absolutely. I also love it when nonprofit directors are on my next step calls, dockets, or wanting to learn more about faith-driven entrepreneur because it's just as valuable for them.
I love that. And it's so funny. Just this summer, I've been hearing from campus ministers. In fact, John Gallagher mentioned his son works for Young Life. Our friend Avery Radleff works for an international students ministry. Our friend Jillian Dacey works for Focus, a Catholic campus ministry. Each one of these is responsible for raising some or all of their own funding, not just to live, but to conduct the campus ministry. And so talk about entrepreneurs and taking risk. you got
Absolutely.
to you got to put it all in God's
Absolutely.
hands. Hey, by the way, you mentioned a little bit ago the newsletter. Please remind me. We need to put a link to the newsletter and how folks can subscribe on our show notes as well. So
Absolutely.
so let me ask you then, along that line, when you have a group of entrepreneurs together and you are starting to introduce each other and start to talk about the common issues, one of the things that I've heard you say several times here in our first half hour together is that often it can feel alone. So what do you think are the barriers to folks either joining the group or when they're in the group speaking? Are folks open up, or are they kind of bashful and hanging back? What do you think?
So I can speak from my own facilitation of groups, and then I can also speak just in general feedback of entrepreneurs that have gone through the experience. I think the biggest barrier is being able to slow down.
Mm,
Uh, our foundation series from an entrepreneur's perspective is once a week for 8 weeks. That's really our framework. So we have 4 cohorts a year that we really focus in on.
mhm,
And my experience is the biggest barrier is not financially because our groups are free. The biggest barrier is being able to, as an entrepreneur, guard the hour.
mm,
And I would just say whether you join a group or not, the most important thing is take time as an entrepreneur to be able to press the pause button at least sometimes. Because what I find is people they see this commitment, which 8 weeks, yes, it does sound like a lot. You're talking about 2 months, but the 8 weeks definitely goes by extremely fast at the same notion.
Hmm.
And so my greatest feedback, but then also call for entrepreneurs, investors listening to this podcast is we're all busy. We all have the same 24 hours in a day, but from a perspective of knowing how impactful and transformational guarding an hour can be, it's crucial
Yeah.
because we have to. John Mark Comer has two great books. One is Practicing the Way, and the other one is the Ruthless Elimination of Hurry.
Mm.
And if we don't hone in on that, that's what leads to this burnout. That's what leads
Mhm.
to this feeling of isolation and loneliness and running fast. But the intentionality behind just slowing down, that would be my call.
I love that. And so two things on that. The first is when we talked about the eureka moment with folks that you found in your facilitation, you mentioned something that was really good. And that is I take personal time. I'm gonna take my personal time and I'm gonna, focus on these documents. And I agree, that's so important to just take a moment, whether it's the Bible, whether it's some devotion or something like that. But I'm not making fun of you, but I just want to point out, show you the mirror. But then you said, and then I got this great email from a guy who's saying thank you. So the email intruded on your personal time. I got a funny story about that along that line. I was talking to a group of lawyers who were healthcare lawyers and talking about professionalism and work-life balance, and asked them, how many of y'all work on Sundays? And only a few raised their hands. And I was like, how many of you check email on Sundays? Every single hand went up. And I'm like, guys, we got to talk about drawing boundaries and figuring out how to have some personal time. Isn't that funny?
It is funny. It is funny. And Rich, this was after the kids were in bed at 9:30 at night. And to be honest, I wasn't intentionally going to check email, but I cherry picked his email because
That's
I
good.
was really intentional about I just wanted to connect with the guy. I was like, what did he say?
Right,
Because
right, of course. Hey, listen, and
yeah,
it was a holy moment because now you got to tell us about it.
absolutely.
I'm just messing with you, man.
Oh yeah,
But I
it's
agree.
true.
So let's talk about that for a minute, because the book of James tells us, and it even says, if you're in a business, James tells us, don't just say, I'm going to go there and do this or that, but pray and ask for guidance from the Spirit. So what does that look like when you're in a group of entrepreneurs and trying to tell everybody, guard that hour? I just love that message. Does that also then include, hey, and during that hour, don't forget to pray and ask for guidance from God? Is that part of your process?
Absolutely. So when I'm facilitating a personal group, I love to open the hour in prayer. Um, it's very intentional whenever we actually provide the guidelines of hosting a group from a facilitator perspective. That's our first thing, open in prayer. Interestingly enough, I started my June cohort a couple of weeks ago now, but I forgot to pray. I
Really?
did. I got so involved with hearing about people's stories, and then I was opening up in introductions, and I had actually had an entrepreneur in that group send me a note after the recap email, and she was very kind, but she was like, "Hey, I would we had a great session, but could we please start out the hour in prayer?"
Ooh.
And in my response back to her, I was honest. I said, I am so sorry. I
Good for you.
always start these groups out in prayer. Thank
Exactly.
you. I just got so excited by sake of just talking, obviously.
Exactly.
I forgot to pray, but yes, as an organization, as an organization, we can put this in the show notes as well. We actually have a global prayer call that happens at 8:30 a.m. Central on Thursday mornings.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Anybody is welcome. So yes, absolutely. As an organization, we highly value and appreciate prayer
That's
across the board.
awesome. Hey, just a little bit ago, Addison, we talked about how there was only one perfect man and it was not me. You feel free to use that. Don't worry.
I,
Skipping prayer is part of the deal, man. When you get distracted or
it's
getting off on the wrong floor on an elevator, which I did yesterday, it just happens.
Absolutely. And I myself have a baseball story that involves an elevator and the word patience. So I definitely have my own personal testimony to how elevators have changed my life as well.
That's awesome. All right. Well, have we got time to hear it? Is it one that you can tell us? This sounds great.
Uh, yeah, I'm very short. My dad is certainly a guy that very much respect, and we spent a lot of time in the backyard together playing baseball. We were at a tournament, and we were staying at a hotel. I was probably 13, so playing select ball tournaments. But there was a guy that had actually been stuck in the elevator like
Oh,
a couple of different times, and for some reason the doors wouldn't open and he's going back and forth. Anyway, I had forgotten the key, and so dad and I were going back up to grab something from the hotel room, and this guy just really starts opening up. He was talking about how he'd gotten stuck in the elevator, and really just invoking this presence of, hey, things are going to happen, life is going to happen, um, but just ultimately have patience. And I still vividly remember thinking and telling my dad as we were going to the car, I was like, I've had to work on patience a long time, still working on patience, if I'm going
right,
to be
right.
completely honest with you. uh, but just the impact that a stranger can have in an elevator when you're not even expecting it, and teaching you a life lesson. And as a 13-year-old, roughly, just knowing that
Yeah.
it was there, was
And I'm
very
glad
impactful.
I'm glad that you took that big picture perspective, because if I heard the story right, the last thing many people want to hear from someone else in the elevator is stories about how they've been stuck in the elevator multiple times.
Right.
Like, listen, dude,
Absolutely.
it's like, literally, we sat next to Rebecca and I on the way home from Nashville yesterday on the airplane. Sat next to somebody who was like, "Have you heard about the airplane crash last week?" I'm like, "No."
This
What are
is
you
not the
doing?
time.
Exactly. So, having said that, the it sounds like part of, in fact, maybe the part that you enjoy the most of your experience is talking with other entrepreneurs. What got you into this? What called you into this line of work? Because it is so specific. When I talk to people all the time as the Christian capitalist, I talk to entrepreneurs about their faith, but so many entrepreneurs are out there who are afraid of talking about their faith, or worried that they're going to be offensive to others sitting here in 2025. There are people who say, I don't want to even call it the Christmas party because I don't want to offend others. Right. So what called you into this particular ministry?
This is a chicken or the egg conversation. Whenever I was framing how to even present this, I don't know what came first. My dad was in business, he was in leadership, he was a business professor. So I've always been around this world of business and leadership and entrepreneurship from a very young age. But intentionally, whenever I stopped coaching college baseball, or in the midst of saying, "Hey, what is next for me?" I really felt a nudge. And Halftime Institute is a phenomenal organization. And for those listening, the tagline is "From Success to Significance." Bob Buford wrote the book a number of years ago. Um, and full circle moment, Halftime and Faith Driven are now working together. Halftime came under the umbrella of the Faith Driven movement last fall. So
Oh, cool.
very excited to work directly with them now. The point of that being is you come into this halftime moment of success and significance. And I feel like I had that back in 2017 whenever I was coming out of baseball and moving into what's next. And that's actually when I found Right Now Media, which was the first nonprofit that I worked for, and honing in on this idea of I wanted to make my work meaningful. Um, Articulating that, I just felt a Holy Spirit nudge, is what I like to say, of, hey, make your work intentional. And we all have intentional work, don't get me wrong, but my personal conviction was, how can I tie my faith with work? And that was before I'd even really stepped into that ecosystem.
Hmm.
And I found Right Now Media in 2017. This is actually the third nonprofit that I've worked for, from Right Now Media to another global nonprofit to now Faith Driven Entrepreneur. But the intentionality that I found personally is this realization of, I myself want to make my work meaningful. What does that look like for me? For me, it was, I want to infuse my faith with my work because I felt that
Mhm.
personal conviction.
Mhm.
I would say, and I tell every entrepreneur I work with, hey, you're on a different journey. You have a specific journey, you have a specific business, or maybe you're running a nonprofit. You have your own personal conviction of how you portray your faith in the marketplace.
Yeah.
There's no clear blueprint. Like, if we're being honest, the Bible's our blueprint. We just see, hey, God, how can you use me today? And whether that's a God focused mission statement or a value statement for your organization, that's completely up to you. But at the bare minimum, it's just how you interact with your employees and clients.
Yeah.
And so, being a sounding board for entrepreneurs so that they don't have to feel this overwhelming pressure of they have to go through this complete brand rehaul, which, if you need a brand rehaul, reach out to Brianna with Ignite Collective Agency because she's phenomenal.
Nice.
So
Product
as
placement,
soon
man. I
as,
love it.
hey, I'm there. I'm a connector. Like, at the end of the day, I love two things. One, talking, and two, building relationships and connecting people with great people.
Fantastic.
So that's why I love what I do.
I love it. Hey, so along that line, oh man, that's awesome. When you infuse your faith in your business, I want to recall a little bit of history that maybe even you and your dad have talked about, given his professorship in these areas. Um, Martin Luther, 500 years ago, was one of the first people to say that a vocation, that pursuing work as a calling of God, that a vocation doesn't have to be in the church, that when we work, we glorify God. And this is a core concept of the Christian capitalist. When we work, we glorify God no matter what kind of work we do. And there's this ancient woodcut that I read in a biography of Luther in talking about this very subject, of a cobbler just sitting there at his bench, knocking on shoes and putting the soles of the shoes on, probably made of wood, and said, even the cobbler glorifies God through his work, that his faith is infused in that work, because he's saying, I'm giving it back to you. What do you think about that core concept?
I think it's great. I 100% agree. I think from a societal standpoint, we have a lot of noise surrounding us that says we have to be the best or we have to be at the top. But what I say, and what correlates with what you're talking about, is we all have impact. We all have a place that we have impact, and we need to respect the impact that we've been given, right?
Mm,
I mean, even scripturally, we talk about this idea of, if you're given little, do great with that little. If you're given much, do great with that much, right? It goes back to the parable of the talents.
right.
How are you stewarding what God has given you? And whether that's a solopreneurship or whether that allows you, like Henry, to scale your clothing business and then pivot that into his story of bandwidth.com and taking that public. We all have different journeys, but I think the journey is, in fact, walking with God and knowing that the intentionality of us being able to be quiet, be still with God, and just continue to ask the question of, God, how can we work in this together? And whether that turns into one business or multiple businesses, just the encouragement of saying, hey, if you can be a cobbler, be the best cobbler that you can be,
Yeah.
and people are going to start talking about it.
Yep. Exactly. And furthermore, when you infuse your faith into your business, from my perspective, and this is the pastor talking, you don't necessarily need to say, I'm doing this to glorify God. You can do that through your actions. We call that shining the light of Christ to people. Folks tell me all the time, gosh, there's something, especially when I'm driving with my wife, Rebecca, there's something different about you two. Why is it that you're so, positive? Why is it that you're taking so much time to talk with us and be kind to us? And if the situation allows, we'll talk about Jesus. But most importantly, it's leading by example and shining the light of Christ to others. And so I think it's so fantastic that you have the opportunity to do that with our entrepreneurs on a regular basis. But this reminds me, Addison, as I literally just Googled your name in preparation for today, I saw a reference to you as a missionary. Do you think of yourself as a missionary at the Baptist Church?
So you might have seen a different Addison Williams. I'm not sure.
It may have been.
Uh, it may have been another Addison Williams. I personally am not associated with a Baptist church, which is totally fine. But I have gone on mission trips. I spent 3.5 weeks with Athletes in Action in the Dominican Republic when I was
Ooh,
a senior in high school, going into playing college ball. And talk about God moments. We've talked about baseball, but full circle moment. I actually got a phone call from a guy that I played baseball with. Now it's been 15 years since 2010, but he called me and said, "Addison, I'm looking for some baseball advisors to help college students or high school students go into college ball. Are you interested in working with me? It's a
ooh,
side project, it's a side thing, but intentionality of just being able to say, if a player needs help, I'm there for them."
yeah,
And so the intentionality of being a missionary, you know, 39 of the 40 miracles Jesus talked about was in the marketplace. So we all have missionary tendencies. I actually have a great friend of mine that runs marketplace mission trips for those that want to be intentional about their faith in the marketplace. And with that being said, do I consider myself a missionary? Define that. I consider myself a follower of Christ that does go on mission trips when I'm on the field, at work, and when I'm talking to people.
I love it. I love it because if you take the Great Commission as a set of marching orders, we're all missionaries, right?
Absolutely. We
Hey,
don't have to go overseas to be a missionary.
well, and that's so funny you say that because those three missionaries we mentioned, the one Jillian with Focus, Avery with International Students, and John Gallagher's son with Young Life, they're all here in America. You know, that's an important part of their intentionality. So let me switch gears with you then to talk about college campuses because this is an important part of the Christian capitalist movement as well. Five young people have raised their hands to say, we want to start Christian capitalist college clubs on our campuses. And I'm so excited. They're all sophomores. So they've been building the movement on their campuses this past year. And now, as rising juniors, we're going to file applications and hopefully get things rolling at Alabama and Auburn, the buckle of the Bible Belt, at Ole Miss,
Great.
yep, Ole Miss in South Carolina, and then at Notre Dame. And so I'm so excited for these kids who are really going to focus on two things. The first is bringing students together, talk about being Christians in business. And then, of course, because this is the message of the Christian capitalist, to then help the poor and needy in their communities. Given your experience with Athletes in Action and being a Christian on a college baseball team, what kind of advice would you give our college club presidents about how to put this together on campus?
I am a big fan of Athletes in Action. My personal testimony is more aligned with FCA, Fellowship of Christian Athletes.
Hmm.
Um, from high school to college, I would say meet people where they are. We all have intentionality of how we interact with people day in and day out in the classrooms. I think the biggest thing that I've started to do is just ask people questions. And it's really great whenever you start asking questions. People tell what they're passionate about. People involve themselves. They talk about things that they're a part of. And so my encouragement is, don't sacrifice quality for quantity. Start with a few people that understand the vision and the mission that you are trying to accomplish, and then let it grow organically. Don't try to become the next big organization. Start with
Like
quality.
FCA, right? I mean, FCA is
Ex-
FCA. It took a long time to get there.
abs- Absolutely. And they're still growing, right? They
Yeah.
still have to continue to add value for athletes on campuses. And specifically for the Christian capitalist, it's the same idea. Start with quality, build that up, continue to provide proof of concept. Whenever I talk to a pastor of a church that is newer to faith driven entrepreneur, I always like to use the word pilot. Let's pilot this. Let's see where it goes.
Oh,
Let's
that's great.
see how we can build impact and execute accordingly.
That's fantastic. Hey, so along that line, And I appreciate that guidance. We're working with the campus presidents this month of June to get ready to file these applications and hit the ground running, because so many students, especially in the SEC, female students show up for Rush in the last week of July. It's it is summer, college summer like nowhere else. It's this is perfect timing for that guidance, and I appreciate it. Let me switch gears, because we spent so much time talking about work, to the other big pillar of our movement, and that is giving. You mentioned earlier that in talking with entrepreneurs, that the content and the community are really what y'all strive to do, and that there are 12 marks of the faith-driven entrepreneur. I apologize that I haven't had a chance to review these, because I just learned about it earlier in our conversation. But does giving fit into that, those 12 marks?
That's a great question. With the pillars that we focus on, we have marks for faith-driven entrepreneurs, and then we have marks for faith-driven investors.
Ah,
And so I would say there's a difference in the language and the audience that we seek to serve. But whenever it comes to giving and being intentional about that, one of the really exciting projects or things that we're working on as a movement is, in fact, solving the world's greatest problems. And I would just like to pay tribute to that, because the one thing that we want to do from an entrepreneur and investor standpoint, we really want to invoke this idea of what can I do, like stir the heart. Solving the world's greatest problems is, in fact, what it sounds like. And we ask people, what is your problem? And this ranges from, is it dirty water? Is it human trafficking? Is it broken families? And
mhm.
so we've identified 32 problems. And really, the core element of that is, how do we bring in great businesses, kingdom investments, and then go and solve these problems together?
I love
And
that.
so
And
it's
don't be
so
afraid to
cool.
dream big.
It's so cool because we get to just ask, Rich, what's your problem? Right? With a smile on our face, because we don't mean
Exactly.
anything by it. But it's so enticing whenever you can think about ways to start a business, or if you're an investor listening to this podcast, it's starting to invoke this idea of, what does it mean to like, what is your problem? What are you passionate about? What wakes you up at night or gets you up early in the mornings? Or you just have these heart moments whenever you're at a restaurant and you want to just give $100 tip to the waitress because you have a feel for their story. I don't
Yeah.
know where that is. My point being in painting that picture is to go back to your original question of giving. I think it's very important to figure out how you feel passionate about it, whether it's giving to a church, whether it's giving to a church and a nonprofit, whether it's sponsoring somebody that's overseas or sponsoring a child, painting that picture of the why. We talked about the start with why earlier. I think it's
Mhm.
very important for you to say, what is your why? How do
Mhm.
you want to steward your resources well? And then you look for opportunities to steward those resources well.
Absolutely. And you've hit upon an important point, because entrepreneurs as a group, I mean, we think about business owners, but they can vary widely in the financial success that they enjoy. In fact, to the point where success may not even be measured in financial terms. You may some who's got a solo entrepreneurship, and they just remain small, and that's enough. And then you got somebody who grows a business, takes it public, and we're measuring their financial return on the investment there with a lot of zeros. One of our core concepts, though, is anybody can be a Christian capitalist. You can go from being the greeter at the door of the store to the owner of the chains of the stores, right? And
Right.
anywhere in between. And it's because the giving heart doesn't really require a specific amount. The giving heart, like the widow's mite, requires giving it all, and giving as much as you can. So let's talk about that. Where have you seen in your work with FDE and FDI? Where have you seen examples of generous giving that can inspire our listeners and viewers?
Well, one of the things that I would just make note is Jogs, Journey of Generosity. It's one of our core partnering organizations that we work with. It's very intentional about what does being generous mean and taking people through that. Uh, but I think it goes back to defining from an entrepreneurial perspective. I was talking with one just yesterday about this idea of I I I want to steward my resources well. I'm actively defining what that looks like. We actually have a great example. Uh, Waste Plan is an African company. Bertie Lawrence is the CEO. He actually created a nonprofit entity called Nika Capital, and then Nika Capital actually holds 51% of Waste Plan. So the
Mm,
ownership completely shifted to this idea of God truly owns my business.
wow.
So I think that there are full scale examples of where we can steward our resources well. That's a large example, but honing back into the smaller business that might be listening to this podcast, I think it hones in on how do you feel convicted to be generous? What does
Yeah,
that look like for you? And I think that there are a gamut of opportunities. The only advice that I would give is just start asking yourself the questions with the businesses that you've been given. How can I personally be generous? And what does that look like from a company standpoint? Us personally, with Faith Driven Movements, we also have we work with an organization called Love Works,
hmm,
which is a designated fund. Any employee can opt into it. They can put in, you know, a quarter if they wanted to, or they could put in $20 to their paycheck. But the idea is a pool of money that's specific to our employees that if there's a time of crisis or need, they can go through this Love Works journey of applying and then having that unexpected medical bill paid for.
that's
And so that's just a
fantastic.
tangible. It's so great. We
Yeah.
actually started it this year, very excited about this opportunity. But I think there are creative ways that people might not be aware of, but LoveWorks is certainly a great opportunity. Or just make your own fund or care for your employees in unique ways. It all goes back to being generous and stewarding with the wealth that you've been given as a company.
Exactly, and not just for the world, but for the people that work right there in the company. I love that. We've had other folks on the podcast describe that as like an employee assistance fund, but I love the name Love Works, and I'm going to be spreading that around. That's fantastic. Well, Addison,
Absolutely.
we've gone at it for almost an hour, and I know that we've got plenty more to discuss. But I want to draw our time together and hopefully invite you back in the future to continue to talk about these themes with you. But as we conclude our time together today, my question for you is: what does it mean to you to be a Christian capitalist?
Whenever I think about this question, I go back to this idea of restoration. Restoration has been on my heart for quite some time when I think about my own personal ventures and heart posture. Christian capitalist to me really ensues this idea of sewing everything together. Be intentional about the work that you do, and then through that work that you do, steward well with what you've been given and the opportunities from there. It truly does restore. And from a heart perspective, it's something that I'm actually actively going through. This idea of restoration and focus and being generous with that as well.
I love it. And as Paul tells Timothy in his first letter, building up the life that really is life through your generosity. Addison, thank you so much for joining us today. We've really enjoyed our discussion and, gosh, the pearls of wisdom that you've shared with us today. We're going to put all kinds of links in the show notes to faith driven entrepreneurs and faith driven investors and the various entities that you mentioned. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Rich, for having me. It truly has been a pleasure.
Outstanding. And everybody, thank you for joining us here on the Christian Capitalist Podcast. Follow us on social media. Take a look at all the show notes that Addison and I have mentioned together today. And as always, remember, the more we make, the more we give.